Hello and welcome to Roland's Travels podcast. It's Roland here. Who else could it be? Thank you for joining me once again for the podcast. And if you're new here, a very warm welcome to you as well. Our guest today is Annette Lang. She's an author, she's a podcaster, she's a public speaker. Oh, she does all kinds of things to do with history. So we're going to talk to Annette really about history and also why it isn't boring, as per her blog, Non-Boring History. Let's meet Annette right now. Hi Annette, how are you?
I'm fine, Roland. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm an avid reader of your blog or newsletter, Non-Boring History. So perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I'd like to really ask you to tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you became a historian.
Well, it's complicated. And how many hours do you have? So I'll try and give you the quick version. I've been in the States 40 years, but magically still sound like this. I have no idea why. I think it's because it gets me better service in shops. I'm a Scot. I'm from Dundee. I grew up in Stevenage, of all places. Yeah, I know. And so long story short, I ended up going to university in America before that was a very widespread thing for a lot of young British people. And I was going to be a journalist, and I got a degree in journalism, changed my mind. I also had a second major, as they're called, focus in history, and went off to become, to get a PhD with the intention of becoming a history professor. Now, obviously I'm not telling you half the stuff that led to that, but I had always been interested in history. And I think the first memory I have is sitting drawing pictures of little Anglo-Saxon figures when I was in junior school and labeling them, thinking, oh, this is fascinating, or whatever word I would have used to myself. And the other memory that was really pivotal was watching Shoulder to Shoulder, which was a series made in 1974 with all sorts of famous actors, directed by Midge McKenzie, that has disturbingly vanished. You cannot get it anywhere. And I'm sure there is an innocent explanation like rights issues, but the BBC isn't responding when people have asked. And of course, perhaps in this day and age, they don't want people to see, respectable ladies chucking rocks through windows, suffragettes. And it was all about the suffragette movement. You can imagine, I was 10 years old watching not only respectable ladies chucking rocks through shop windows, but then being forcibly fed, which in prison, as the suffragettes were. So I was both horrified and fascinated. I remember going to our mobile library, which used to park at the end of our street, clearing it out of the remarkably large collection they had for children on the suffragettes. And I was hooked. Saw Roots when I was 12. That was another pivotal moment, got me interested in American history from that moment forward. And I was actually, I managed to get a work of African-American history, a textbook by a professor called John Hope Franklin, who was a pioneer in the field. And years later, I met Dr. Franklin at a conference, and I made a complete fool of myself. I was just so thrilled. So anyway, I finally, to my astonishment, ended up as a professor of early American history. That's colonial and revolutionary America. And I had meant to do British history. I've always carried a candle. I come back often to the UK. But I discovered that colonial America is really British history only abroad. There's a lot more to it than that. But I think in Britain, people tend to think, particularly in England, people tend to think that once you leave, that's it, the door closes behind you, you're off, you're now an American or Australian, New Zealander. And for those of us who live overseas, it really isn't that simple. I've perhaps met 2 people who felt they were now just Americans. Everybody else, regardless of whether they take citizenship or not, the standard thing is, oh yeah, but I'm British, and of course we get Americanized, we sound American, and many of us are like time capsules. I feel like a time traveler when I come back to the UK, and that's why I try to come back often so I can keep up with all the change. But at the same time, we have a real interest in what happens in the UK, and so my work touches on, as a historian, touches on British history, even West African history, what's called the Atlantic world. So that's a very long and convoluted answer to your question. Sorry.
That gives us a great idea. It's obviously a real passion, which is great if you can have a career that follows your passion. So many people don't always achieve that. So well done.
Well, thank you, except that I quit being a professor in 2008. I worked at Georgia Southern University, which was a deeply dysfunctional place. And increasingly, we're finding that's true of most universities on both sides of the Atlantic. There's been a massive expansion of bureaucracy at the expense of intellectuals. It's not a complicated enterprise. You bring educated people to a place, and you bring young people who want to study with them, and you bring them together. And, really, even when I was at college and university in California in the 80s, there was still some truth to that, even at a university that mostly served a working class population. I mean, I picked the wrong place, but I loved being there, but, I had no idea what I was doing. University in those days was a university. But it really struck me, how even then administrators were not calling all the shots. And I worked in the public relations office. I was a student. I wrote articles for press releases, stuff for the alumni magazine. And I was one of 4 people who worked in the department, 4, including the secretary. And now I look, and I think it's about 24 or 30. And that's really become the mission of universities, is to support an ever-growing cadre of overpaid, empty suits. And faculty, meanwhile, are charged with doing more and more work to make the institution look good on fewer and fewer resources and stagnant pay. So, now we're seeing that with strikes and whatnot. Well, I quit before quitting was cool. So I resigned in 2008 with unclear plans, and fingers crossed that I could find something to do that would involve history, but wouldn't involve working for one of these places.
Fine. Well, let's feedback now to what you think is, as a historian, what's the most essential quality, in your opinion, that a historian would need, or somebody who's thinking of moving into the field of history?
Well, it isn't good writing, I have to say. I trained as a journalist, I think, and I always thought of myself as a journalist, not necessarily as a writer per se. And a lot of academic writing is pretty painful to read. Which is one reason why I try to translate it for the public in my newsletter, make it entertaining even. I think the number one quality, and the thing that we're trained to do, is to follow the evidence, is to be skeptical about individual pieces of evidence, sure, but you don't look at each one and sort of say, okay, who wrote this and how do I know it's true? You just keep reading and reading. You marinate in documents. And I ruined my eyesight reading 10,000 letters. Yes, I've counted. Between Church of England missionaries in America and the Bishop of London between 1700 and 1750 on microfilm. Oh. But it's only in marinating in documents that you start to see patterns, you start to get a sense of what's going on. And I came into this wanting to write about what would it be like to be me, only in the 18th century? What would it be like to be an immigrant from Britain? And then I realized that that's not what they were writing about. Nor were they writing much about religion. They were complaining about their pay and their parishioners. And people, going off and visiting other churches, and slave owners not supporting the conversion of the enslaved people they owned. And, so the more I read, the more my ideas, my thesis, even my topic went out the window. And you have to be open to that. And by the same token, if you start out with a really lovely, shiny thesis, like African Americans resisted Christianity in the 18th century because it was considered something associated with whites, and particularly the whites who oppressed them. And then the evidence tells you actually that's not what's happening at all, which is my great claim to fame as a historian. I figured this out, that in fact many Africans in slavery in South Carolina came from the Kingdom of Congo, which was Catholic. You can't hang on to your thesis and say, well, I'm going to ignore that.
No.
You've got to be open. You've got to be self-examining. You've got to challenge your own assumptions. And you have to be skeptical, but not cynical. So I hope that answers
arrive at the facts. It does. Well, right. You've kind of covered the point. I was going to say, how do you check for accuracy? So really, it's examining as many documents and writings as you can about events to double check.
Thank you, because that's actually quite a hard thing to explain to a lot of folks, and you've got it straight away. So well done, tick, Roland. You get VG, because that's it's a holistic approach. And so one of the things that's happening in education in this country, and nobody listens to professors. This fascinates me. Nobody in education, a handful of people may listen to a few of the famous folks, and that's about it. But, one supposition is that what you do is you hand children documents, individual documents, and you have them analyze them as if they were works of literature. And of course, that's not how historians work at all. And that can take you right down the rabbit hole of crazy. Not to mention that it's not nearly as interesting to kids as just telling stories. And, that's the problem with history, is we make it look easy. We tell stories. But if you actually listen to the stories, you start to get the significance. And it's just a wonderful subject. Can I just say, there was one thing I did not mention in my long monologue about my background in the UK, was I was blessed with two extraordinary teachers at school. I went to a former grammar school. Had it still been a grammar school, I wouldn't have got in. I'm a big fan of comprehensive education, but I cannot do maths. Now I would probably be identified as having dyscalculia. But at the time, I was just considered lazy and useless at it. But my history teachers, Colin Robson and Alan Gardner, eccentric, provocative, they would get fired today, the two of them. They team taught, they said outrageous things. In a girls' school, they said, Robson used to say, all trouble in the past is caused by money, religion, and women. But the whole point was to get us to fight. I mean, and he actually wrote in my report card, I enjoy our duels. At one point, he called me a communist, and I was outraged, rightfully, and I walked out. And I remember thinking, oh, God, halfway down the corridor, I'm in such trouble, but I wasn't. And they played off each other. They used all sorts of visual aids. They used role play, but mostly they lectured, and they did it in a very entertaining and engaging way. And everything I learned about teaching, I learned from Robson and Gardner. And I had the great pleasure to be able to tell them that when they were both in their 70s, which was very moving, actually.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's nice when you have a teacher that can inspire children in that way. So even if people don't become historians, at least they've got a love and a understanding of history that they wouldn't have had if it was just boringly put across to them.
And I think that's their goal. It was their goal for sure, and it was my goal too. Nobody thought any of us would grow up from Stevenage. Okay, I mean, working class town. As the old deputy headmistress said to me about 20 years ago, she said, even when it was a grammar school, the girls were ghastly. She said.
I will send any letters from Angry of Stevenage over to you, Annette,
yeah,
so don't worry about it.
Go for it. I can defend myself quite. Love you. But I mean, Stevenage did what it set out to do, which is it removed people from the London slums, and within 2 generations had them moving into the middle class. And we can certainly argue that it wasn't anything to do with Stevenage. But I've come to think that Gary Young, the Guardian journalist, who's probably our best known Stevenage person, he said, well, it created me. So I've got to think this is a good thing.
Yeah. Yes.
And I thought, oh, that is a good point. So, yeah, but I think, back to the original point, we're not trying to make more historians. There's so much underemployment. We just want everyone to, if you're teaching history right, and unfortunately not everybody does, but you want people to realize how much it enriches their lives to have these X-ray specs, to be able to look into the past, to find subjects that connect with them. And if we can also communicate how historians think, I think that's good for society. We live in a very polarized time. I don't need to tell you. And that's true in the UK and even more true in the US. And historians are never content with slapping a label on something, putting it in a drawer and calling it done. And, so when somebody is a historian and they're writing polemics and they're writing opinion pieces, I always cringe a little bit, because you can be an activist and a historian. I don't think you can be them at the same time. No. I think you have a duty to consider that you don't know everything, and we won't know for another 30 years. And I wish I could plan on being around in 30 years, because what will come out about this period in the documents will change the way people think about it and thought about it at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, let's talk about what is your favourite period in history?
Yeah, well, of course, I'm supposed to say the 18th century, because that's what I studied.
Doesn't anything you like, what it genuinely is?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one. It's got to be the 18th century in America, because, British people, friends of mine tease me, and they're like, they don't have any history in America. And I say, but you know what? Because that's not true. First of all, if you count American Indians, and we do, and increasingly a lot of work is done, this is an ancient past. But if you consider that, early America, which for most of us is the 17th and 18th century, most of what we study is the 17th and 18th century, it's absolutely vast, and it touches on the whole world. I'm reading Dr. Ben Marsh right now. He's most famous as the patriarch of the Marsh family singers at the moment, but he's actually an early American historian. I've known him for a long time. And he's written a wonderful book about silk culture. And this is a tough sell to the public. Who the hell wants to read about that? But he shows how what happens on one side of the world strongly affects what happens on the other side of the world. Events in Virginia are affecting what's happening in London, and vice versa. And so the idea of globalization, which we think is a new one, is actually quite old. So I'm a big fan of early American history. And in second place, 20th century US, I'm a big fan of the first half. Everything from, I'm not as well read about it as I'd like to be, but African American history particularly is a subject I'm really fascinated by. And I was a member of the Africana Studies program, which is African American history at Georgia Southern. And so, just the struggles that people have gone through, and the astonishing amount of community mindedness and dignity that people have, and to see that reflected in the modern day. And that's a hard thing to see, because people, particularly in a small rural community like the one where I lived, are rightly cautious around strangers, cautious around white people they don't know, and cautious about giving up control of their past. And the glimpses that I got of local history were fascinating and profoundly moving. So yeah, 20th century, first half.
Excellent. Any particular historical figure that you kind of hone in on as well in that period?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could go on about how really, my larger purpose is to say history is about everybody. I mean, yes, Timothy Breen, who's at Northwestern University here, is one of the great statesmen of early American history. And he said, how do ordinary people make history? I mean, we talk about them, we write social history, but how do they make change? And he said, public opinion. I was like, oh, of course. So then you look at everybody, and I love that. In this country, one half of the country is dismissing the other. And over in the UK, I don't think it's been as bad. I really don't. I haven't been there in 3 years, thank you, pandemic. But my sense is that people are still kind of listening to each other. And please keep doing that. Please keep talking. But it's so it does have to involve everybody. But all right, I'll pick one. FDR. I love FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And if you want me to sort of, British history was my second subject in the PhD. And in British history, that's a really tough one. Churchill. Mm-hmm. That's such a cliched answer. I'm so sorry, but he fascinates me. He and I would disagree on practically everything, and there's no one I would rather have dinner with.
But he was one of those characters that could do lots of things, wasn't he? From art to writing to politics to military, he just did seem to do anything.
Yeah, well, his art was dreadful, and he was a disaster in military policy. But I mean, Gallipoli, need I say more? But I think what I find about him is, you know, I mean, there's plenty of brickbats I could throw at Winston Churchill, but I find him disarmingly human. And I often think, what would people like that, or the people I knew who were World War II people, and you knew too. I mean, we all knew them. What would they say if they came back now? I met up with my 89-year-old English teacher in 2006, and she was, very well educated. She was at Girton College, the works, and she said, "I do find modern life confusing." And I reported this to my best friend, who's now also an academic, because we Stevenage girls really showed them. And she said, "Oh, love, don't we all?" And I thought, if they came back now, they would be agog. Where many of us are agog. And I think we're sort of in this strange place where, I mean, there's a lot going on. I don't want to dig myself deeper into a hole, but rationality, as one of my professors said, who I met with, one of my old professors here, he said, I thought we could all agree on that. He said, but I guess not. And
No.
that's a very difficult time. Yeah.
So you have to ask, we say use your common sense, but you can't really do that anymore with many people because it doesn't seem to exist.
No, and to some extent, this is what really floors me. To some extent, they're right. There's an assumption about common sense that it's obvious to everybody, and in fact it's not. And we have, we live in a more diverse society, and I don't just mean that in terms of quote unquote race, which is such a rabbit hole to go down. Racism came first, then there was race. In America, race is a fixation, and in Britain, I'm happy to announce you're doing a better job. I don't care what anybody says, and I'll fight that to the death. I do think we are more diverse in viewpoint, and we are exposed to a lot more things. And so what is common sense? But at the same time, there are some things that are common sense. Don't put your hand in a fire, you'll get burned, and that could apply to.
We could challenge some people on that one with their common sense if they go on TikTok, but that's another story. We'll move on from that one, I think. What about your Substack blog, Non-Boring History? That's how I found you, Annette. I started using Substack myself for Roland's travels, and of course, like you do, you sort of do a little search for subjects you're interested in, and up you popped, and I started reading your free posts at first. Now I'm a paid subscriber, which I enjoyed the extra posts, so thank you very much for that. So perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about it, and rather than me.
Yeah, this was my pandemic project. So what I'd done is cobbled together, I won't call it a living exactly, but an income. I wrote 4 time travel novels called the Snipesville Chronicles, and they're partly set in a town I call Balesworth, and it's kind of a fictionalized version of Stevenage. It's what I know best. And partly set in a small town in Georgia that looks a lot like the one where I was living and teaching at the time. And it's about, they're aimed at kids, but I ended up with a lot of adult readers, which I didn't expect. I'm not a bestseller, but I have a really passionate niche audience, which is nice. And my books are used in schools, which really, even at a posh school in nearby Milwaukee, they use them. And I thought, wow, I didn't expect that. So the 3 kids from this small town in Georgia, 2 of whom are from California, where I lived for many years, who find themselves without any warning in England in World War II. And I really wanted to show my best take on what that might be like. Yeah. And there was a lot of humor in it, because the misunderstandings, particularly because the kids sound like they're British, act like they're British, but of course haven't a clue what's going on around them. They sound like they're from the 40s. I mean, but they have to somehow survive. Of course, they all want to go home. It's the standard trope, but the humor and the pathos came from the relationships that they build, and particularly with a woman called Mrs. Devonish, who is that kind of archetypal, terrifying World War II lady that we all knew. And then in the subsequent books, they go back and forth across the Atlantic. They go to, in the second book, I think they go to Britain in 1851, child labor, Great Exhibition, and also Georgia, slavery, the whole 9 yards. Third book, they go all the way back to 1752, and most of it is in Georgia, although some of it's in Britain. And then the fourth one, which was the final one, which is... I've completely forgotten the title of. I must be losing my marbles. One Way or Another, is set in the Edwardian period, which is known as the Progressive Era in the US. And so it's not teachy preachy. I really focused on the stories. I loved writing these, and I loved what they brought me to do and the kind of audiences that I got. I talked in schools, I still do. And then the pandemic happened. I was writing a novel. I wasn't too pleased with how it was going. The school visits evaporated, although I did get some on Zoom. And I read about this new thing called Substack. And a journalist named Dan Rather, who was kind of like, I don't know, Robert Dougal, back in the day, one of the old BBC newsreaders, right? He said on Facebook, this new platform allows writers to be paid for their writing. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because when I did a blog before, it was hard to stay motivated. I didn't know who was reading it, and it was taking time away from things that I do that actually fund what I do. And that's really always my goal. I'm really old-fashioned. Hello, I'm a time traveler from the 70s. Yeah. And so I thought about it, and I suddenly had this eureka moment of maybe I could do for adults what I've been doing for children all these years. And that is to translate academic history into something entertaining. And then it kind of grew from that. I just kept thinking of all the things that I could do. And then I thought, well, will anybody be interested? Well, the only way to find out is just do it. So I started to do it. And I had a really good initial response, but I'm a cynic. I thought, yeah, but look, some of these people are my former students. They're my friends, sure. And then I started getting strangers. And then I started getting strangers who are willing to pay to support what I'm doing. And that was kind of amazing. And so I'm now in the hundreds with paid subscribers. Although, trust me, if you do the maths, you'll realize that's not even close to a living. I can actually make in schools, talking in schools, and I will in February, that same amount that I make all year at Non-Boring History. I want to keep it going. I mean, again, the goal isn't the money, but I need money to do what I do. Yeah. I'm not rich. Hey, I grew up in Stevenage and I'm from Dundee. So what I've loved about it is not only building an American audience, but I very quickly realized I was getting British people, like your own good self. And so I try, when I write it, to think about you. And then I started getting Canadians and Australians. And I thought, no, I can't write. I can think like a Brit. I can think like an American, but I cannot think in these other ways. So basically my take to those folks is welcome, come on in, just pick a team. You decide.
They're only there because they like what you do, so no need to change. That's it.
No, well, thank you. I came to that conclusion finally, is I just have to sort of keep doing what I'm doing. But I've had British readers say that they appreciate the translations and explanations. I'm conscious of what most Britons don't know. And when I shift my focus to Britain, and when I finally get over there, which I hope to do next year, plan to do next year, then it'd be the opposite, where a lot of things that Americans don't know about Britain. They watch The Crown.
That's very accurate for them, obviously. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I do tease all my readers, and I warn anybody who tunes into Non-Boring History. I am avowedly non-partisan. I mean, my prejudices come up, my biases come up, and I point to them. But I'm also very concerned primarily this be pleasant for everybody, even when we're talking about unpleasant subjects, as you do in history.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's putting across in a way that what I like about your reading, it's natural. You've just done a road trip and you've just been putting those on, and they're nice to read. And yes, there are a few American phrases that without your interpretation I would have had to have certainly gone on to good old Google or some other search engines are available to have found out the meaning of that. So that little bit of wording in brackets or whatever just changes it completely very quickly, which is nice to do that. I think you probably find the Australians and the New Zealanders fit in with the English kind of interpretation anyway. They would understand it,
And the Canadians with the Americans,
Yes.
And I'm relying on that. And folks who come from beyond that, Lord love you. Thank you very much. Well,
you're doing well with it, so it's great to see you on Substack, and I'll put the link in the descriptions so that people can find you on there. I've also got your website, which is netlang.com, so we can find you from there as well. And they can also get to Substack newsletter from your homepage as well, can't they? Because we've got a sign-up form on there.
I have a number of British readers. I can't always know who, because all I get is an email address.
Yeah, you don't tell.
Self-identify, just don't know. But sometimes you see the .co.uk address and you think, okay, there's another one. And I would love people to sign up, even if you think I'm not interested in American history. Well, I talk about British history, but for you it's more for British readers it's more about the American history. But my point is to show you it's not just about America, it's actually British history in an alternate universe sometimes, or directly connecting. And there's so many British people who live over here. Scotland, Ireland, I don't know about Wales, but Scotland and Ireland get this. They're very canny about it. Come on back, come visit, bring lots of money. Whereas my, English people, even friends of mine, well, you've lived over there all these years, you're not really British. It's like, don't do that. Don't do that. Even if you think it, welcome us with open arms, because, I've been going into schools in the deep South for the past, I don't know how many years, 15 years, talking about British history. I tried to engage an American consul about this at a conference or at a meeting about history, and got the brush off. And you think about all the money that France puts into cultural evangelism. You have a built-in advantage in the US that can be a tremendous economic asset. Even little things like my work. I'm nobody. I'm doing these tiny things. If it ever comes to bundles for Britain again, we're standing by. You'd be amazed how many of us are over here. All of us know at least one British person. Even in a small town like Statesboro, Georgia, I thought I'd be the only Brit in the mid-90s. I quickly found out I absolutely was not. There was Sylvia from Wales who ran the local Holiday Inn. There were people on the faculty. There were faculty husbands, faculty wives, professors, staff. I mean, people in town. I stopped meeting war brides for obvious reasons, but I've met them the whole time in 40 years, and we don't tend to hang out together. By the way, might have one or two.
Not like going to Spain, where it becomes fish and chip shops on every street.
No, although I will say there is a very good British bakery and chip shop in Savannah, Georgia, run by a family from Staffordshire.
Somebody's keeping the tradition going then. Good.
Although they have dedicated their lives to making proper fish and chips, and they have just about done it.
Oh, that's brilliant. So thinking about your blog, Substack, Substack's hard for anybody to quite understand. It started as a newsletter, but it's become much more. So it's like a website with a podcast, with video. It's everything now, isn't it, really, Substack, which is great. This is on Substack now.
Yeah, they'll come around and do your dishes for you. I think, honestly, though, a lot of the developments, how much do I want to say and not get in trouble? A lot of the developments are just outgrowths of the main business model, which we're still seeing how this pans out. Writers are in crisis. People think, oh, well, if you enjoy it, you'll just do it for love of it. Yeah, I got bills, darling.
Yeah.
I got bills just like you. And so if I don't get paid to do this, I can't go on these trips. I mean, I can't persuade my long-suffering husband, who's an American who lived in Britain during his childhood, by the way. So he's, I can't persuade him to go on holidays to places like Iowa. That's like asking somebody to go on holiday to Knotty Ash or something. I mean, it's just, unless you're a Ken Dodd fan, the appeal is limited. And so, I have to pay for the El Cheapo hotels and the McDonald's lunches that we do. And so Substack's original goal, and it's really an important one, is to get people to pay for what they're reading. The problem is when you ask people to pay, that some take offense and just flounce off. Many, a few can't afford it, but I think more can afford it than letting on. I had a famous person follow me who didn't realize that I knew she was famous, who Yeah, let's put it that way.
Well,
And not a dime, as we say in the States. So Substack, I think that mission is so important. And basically, in a nutshell, Roland, the real answer to your question is, what folks need to know is it's a blog that gets sent to your email, and it's also a website. So if you miss something or you want to search around and see if I've ever written about it, you can do that.
Go back into it, absolutely.
Right, and you get full access if you pay, and if you don't pay, you just get some of my emails, and that's that. So, and for some people, that's enough, and that's fine.
That's fine. Well, it's helpful to them, and never know, one day they may become paid subscribers, isn't it? So.
Exactly.
2023 is coming up shortly, and you did say you're going to come over to Jolly Blighty at some point. Yes. Have you got plans to write about your travels over here and everything else on the Substack blog?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, I've been coming over for years, partly, visiting family and friends. I have a lot. And partly going to museums and just to get inspiration for my children's novels. I mean, for the Snipesville Chronicles series, I spent a lot of time in places like Beamish, because frankly, buildings like that have all been demolished everywhere else. They're not, there isn't that feel that we had, that post-war feel even to draw on. So I will be writing about this. There is a lot of interest in British history over here. I always try to steer it toward what it's really like, as opposed to mentioning no names, the Crown. What is it like to live here? What is it like today? What was it like in the past? And that can be tricky. British history is still a bit stodgy. I mean, that I don't want to get in trouble again. There are some wonderful people doing social history out there and writing for the public, which gives them a real advantage over us. But, if you look at academic history, it's changing. It's changed a lot. But I think in many people's minds, if you went to school in England, you think of kings and queens and prime ministers a lot. I did study the Chartists, though, in defense of the curriculum of the 70s. So, Americans can be really very well informed about Britain, probably more than British people are informed about America. Yeah. Let's put it that way. And they're certainly interested. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. So we will look forward to reading all about that in the future. So that's good. So Annette, it's been great to have a chat with you. Thank you ever so much for coming on the podcast. I certainly would recommend everyone to take a look at your Substack blog, post, newsletter, etc. We'll call it everything under the sun, and look at non-boring history, because it certainly isn't boring. You do what it says on the tin, as we have that expression over here.
I know it. I keep up.
And well, any subject, even the most exciting, could be made boring by some people, couldn't it? So, but it's to take something that's boring and make it non-boring is really good.
Thank you, Roland. You made my day. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me, and look forward to speaking again, I'm sure, at some time in the future. So take care.
You too, Roland. And again, thanks for all your support. I really appreciate it. And your work, by the way, which is very, very good, guys. So sign up for Roland. Well, you obviously have. Okay.
Yeah. Well, they may just be listening without having signed up. So thank you very much for that plug. Tell them to sign up. Yeah. Thank you, Annette. Thank you.
Thanks.
Once again, I thank Annette for joining me on the podcast, and I thank you too for your time in listening. I hope you enjoyed that interview. We have many more to come over the coming weeks and months, so please do become a subscriber, and really leave a comment or two to tell me any ideas or views that you have on history, or anything we're talking about on the podcast, or anything you'd like to hear in the future. It'll be great to hear from you. Do take care, and thank you.